Kathy. I'd like to introduce you to Fee Plumley, and she's going to talk to us about open source cities, and she's going to explore the concept of the city and how that concept has changed. Thank you, Fee.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of going to talk about the concept of the city and how it's changed, and I'm also kind of not. This is very much like, I'm a digital artist, and I'm quite used to talking about things that I've made or I've learned on my kind of various travels. But this is quite a new space for me, and I'll explain why. But so yeah, a lot of this is kind of ideas that I'm developing rather than necessarily giving you solutions. So I just wanted to do that as a quick disclaimer, so you don't go, damn, that's not what she said she was doing. So yeah, I mean, this is my first LinuxConf. So in the kind of arts world, I'm considered to be quite a major geek, and in this community, I'm a complete moron, and I'm loving every second of it. I'm definitely coming at this while again in the arts world people look at me and say, well, you know, you're all about the digital. I actually think I'm all about the contexts of technology rather than necessarily the technology itself. I'm interested in what technology enables people to do much more than I'm interested in why technology exists and what particular software or hardware we're playing with at this particular moment, because to me it's a tool. So, lose my mouse. Okay, so I am Fee Plumley. I am a geek in a creative sense. I'm doing a project called Really Big Road Trip at the moment that involves me living on a bus and driving around Australia, making and sharing digital art with everyone that I meet. That's my little bus there, and she's parked up on campus as well, so if anybody's interested in coming and seeing her, she's very much work in progress, but she's a very beautiful thing. I'm very, very proud of her, although I did scratch her on my first day of driving her, which is rather upsetting. So yeah, the idea with Really Big Road Trip is I come from the UK. You can probably tell my accent isn't very Australian. I consider Adelaide to be my Australian home. I moved over in 2008, but I first started visiting Australia in 2003. I'm really interested in that kind of, the concept of diaspora, like where do you actually belong? I was born in Nottingham in the UK, but I very much consider Wales to be my cultural home. So I call myself a Welsh Mancunian Australian at the moment, which is very confusing to me as much as anyone else. And I'm really interested in, like, how has culture developed? How have people transitioned from being quite solitary beings living on tops of mountains? You know, you look at the kind of the Druid culture being at one with nature and the stars, to suddenly being these products that we shunt from place to place at exactly the same time every day and in the morning and in the night. And the whole thing just seems really bizarre to me. So I'm kind of interested in what do we mean by city? What do we mean by place? When I was first at university doing interactive multimedia production, one of my lecturers spent a really long time talking about the home page, the importance of the home page. And I remember thinking, well, you know, for me, what exactly is home anyway? And so how do we relate to this concept of home in a digital environment when actually the place that is home is never really ours in the first place? So I'm fascinated about how the concept of the commons. The world is a place that we all had the same right to. We could access uncultivated land, and anybody could do anything with it so long as it didn't deplete the opportunities that other people would have on that same land. And now, ownership is everything. This is my home, this is my land, this is the airspace above my land. This is a very odd concept to me. And, you know, all the way through to Creative Commons and the idea of how we're trying to reframe ownership of products, ownership of content. So, I mean, the idea of fixing common land and giving an ownership entitlement around it was something that only really started at the end of the Middle Ages, the sort of end of medieval times. So I'm kind of looking at who were these people that made these decisions about these property registration systems. Adelaide was actually Australia's first city to introduce property registration systems. And something I think is fascinating about mining culture in Australia is that you talk about it in terms of stakes in the ground. I can claim use this land by literally going to that place at the point that the entitlement registration ends and sticking my stake in the ground. So why don't we still do this? This is something that is, if mining agencies can do it, why don't people do it? What is this definition of place and ownership that we've just accepted that people give us? In the UK, we have a huge allotment culture. We have these public garden spaces. You pay £26 a year, and you can grow your own vegetables in this communal environment. You have a shed there. You do have, sorry, someone's nodding in the background. There are kind of allotment equivalents here, but it's such a core part of British culture. And it was very much, it was the common land to begin with, but then during the war, it was important for vegetables to be grown locally. And so it became a really important part of the community development, the community spirit, to work together collaboratively, to plough in order to create fruit that the community would then share. And now we have guerrilla gardening. So we have people who are actively running around any public environment planting seeds. And in Australia, the guerrilla gardening environment community is actually more about, can you please go and water this seed that I planted, is more important than weeding it or tending it or, putting a cloche around it. So how do different communities manage that kind of social connectivity? Again, going back to land ownership, lords in keeps would say the local peasants could go and use the land, they could go and cultivate the land, and we will protect you, we will give you our supervision, and in return, you need to give us a percentage of your harvest. And so again, it's this relationship between the owners and the community, who's benefiting, who's putting the labour. How does that work? I mean, all this data about how much percentage and whether or not it worked for the peasants and whether the lords were taking advantage, all of this stuff is stuff that I'm looking into and I've got to find out a lot more about. Then you're looking at things like squatter rights. In the UK specifically, we have, it used to be possession is 9/10 of the law. So if you took over an old property, say in London, which is one of the largest squatting communities in the Northern Hemisphere, there would be beautiful old buildings that were just left to rack and ruin. And the squatters would actually move in, restore the buildings, make sure that they weren't left to mould, make sure that they weren't crumbling. You see a lot of houses in London with trees growing outside of the middle of them, because they've just been completely desolate for such a long time. So squatters have actually been contributing to the social makeup, to the physical makeup, to the land, property management and security, and making certain parts of the city very safe, whereas before they were abandoned and desolate. And yet these rights have been decimated regularly and increasingly over the last decade or so, and certainly with the government that we have in at the moment, don't get me started on them. But even looking at people like gypsies, gypsies have a dreadful reputation. Like, you're a traveller community, you're either a hippie, you're a new age traveller, and all you do is talk about unicorns or rainbows. Actually, I had someone ask me if I wanted the bus to go in a convoy with this new age traveller community, and they said I could be their glittering princess, and I was like, God. I really want to post that email, but I think it'd be a bit rude. I said no, by the way, just to make that totally clear. Sorry, I'm a bit busy that lifetime. So yeah, gypsies. I mean, there's a brilliant journalist in the UK called Monbiot, and he writes his monbiot.com. So if you don't read The Guardian or wherever he's publishing his rants to, you can go directly to his own personal blog, and he's fantastic. He's one of the cleanest spoken deep research journalists in the UK at the moment, and he's been doing a lot of writing about gypsies and getting quite a lot of flack for it. And so there's this idea that a traveller is somebody who is an idle layabout because they refuse to stay still. And I'm fascinated by this concept of who and why we decide what people are, the value of humanity, based on whether or not they own property. I know that I will never own a house. I knew this when I was a kid. You can't buy a house and be an artist in the UK. You can't probably here too. Although the first time I visited Australia, you could buy a house in Adelaide with 3 bedrooms and land near the sea for about $60,000. You can't now, but that was a while ago. So I've been wanting to kind of go back and say, well, look, who are the... Sorry, I've mirrored, it's all very confusing. So who are these traveller types? Where did they come from? What did they do? What were their cultural activities? Were they creative? Were they ripping people off? Was it important? What have we learned from it? Why did they stop? And the travelling minstrels are a perfect example of the creative touring community. The physical touring networks are really, really important, particularly for a country like Australia. We've got the National Broadband Network coming, allegedly, hopefully, at some point, if they actually get around to joining the dots. But does that mean that you won't have touring programs anymore? Does it mean that it's no longer necessary to physically go to places because what you can do is live stream it? Is that enough? The touring minstrels, because whenever you're doing a talk, you have to look at Wikipedia about the stuff that you're talking about. And I saw this beautiful line, which is, a minstrel was a medieval European bard who performed songs whose lyrics told stories of distant places or of existing or imaginary historical events. Although minstrels created their own tales, they would often memorise and embellish the works of others. They're like the original open source Creative Commons community. Everybody's journey, and they're sharing it much more broadly than it could possibly manage on its own. These cultural tales, these anecdotes of how different people live and where they live and what matters to their world, what fantastical beasts live in their land. These are all things that are so culturally important to us. Like my identity, I'm English. I never say that publicly, and now you've got it on video, damn it. But I identify as Welsh, and so for me the dragon is a really important beast. If I then come to Australia and say, well, I'm going to be a travelling nomad around Australia, then what exactly am I identifying myself with here? And you look back, emus keep popping up as I'm driving around the country, and you've got all these wonderful, incredible, mythical beasts that are actually still alive now. It's brilliant. It's a crazy country. There's also, there's much more of this nomadic culture going on. There's a brilliant community in the Northern Hemisphere called Nomadic Cities, and they've actually got a call for proposals at the moment, so if anybody likes this travelling culture and wants to go to France is the next one. What they do is they're a bunch of individuals who live in buses and vans and trucks and gypsy caravans and whatever, and backpackers, but their whole idea is about living their life entirely on the move. And so every now and then one of them will get access to a field and they'll go, hey, let's gather. And it's like the old wagon circling thing, right? So like wagon circling was very much about protection. There are a bunch of us all travelling in convoy. When we stop, are we going to be safer if we all park in a line or, drop ourselves off in different parts of the desert, or is it actually going to be safer for us to congregate? What do we gain from coming together physically, even though we are travelling together physically, but we're all distant? So the nomadic cities are very much this community of disparate diaspora entities who physically come together at certain times. And so their next one is going to be in France in October this year, so I'm hoping to go over. Although they do say that if you can't physically get your own vehicle there, they'll lend you one. So I'm hoping I'll get to swap the bus for a gypsy caravan for a couple of weeks. That'd be fun. But there's also this nomad, the KNOW mad. No, mad, actually, that's quite apt, who are very much this kind of the digital nomads. They're people who've recognised that they don't have to physically be in a building in order to deliver the work that they do. They can be anywhere. The keynote speaker yesterday was talking about whether or not you have a desktop or you work on your lap. I work on my lap so much that I've got a scar on my knee from the battery burning it so many times. It's hideous. I can't wait till we've got wetware and then I can plug things in elsewhere and it'll be much better. Okay, thanks. So yeah, the nomadic communities are very much about sharing their knowledge. We all have this common space of, the internet gives us this space that we can have a bin of data and go, here, you can have a look at that. That's all really fun. But it's also about how you take that content and deliver it in other places. Hackerspace communities really interest me because you're all individuals who work in, especially in Adelaide. I'm part of I'm the most useless member of the Adelaide Hackerspace, and there are so many different people across South Australia who are part of the Hackerspace network, but they don't physically come to the gatherings. And so I'm really interested in when and where is it important to bring people together? Conferences and festivals. We're doing the Mini Maker Faire in Adelaide in April. Bringing people physically together is really, really important. So how do you maintain the meaningful live shared experience over vast geographic distances when increasingly it's becoming more expensive and more damaging to the universe to actually travel to those places and physically get together? So basically, that's my kind of little yarn. I am gathering a lot of these ideas. ReallyBigRoadTrip.com is my blog. I'm feasible on Twitter. I've got a Google Plus community that I set up that's it's called Nomads because I'm really interested in finding other people that either are living or are researching this particular area, finding out what they think, why they're doing it, what I can learn from it, how I can share what I'm learning as I go. So I would love to know what you think. I would love to know if you've got any sources of information I should be aware of, and if you're interested in following this journey, then that's how you find me. So thank you very much.